Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Living Bridges conversation. My name is Ranjita Jeurkar, and today I'll be speaking with John Kinyon. John is a senior NVC trainer. He's a coach, a mediator, and an author. And over the last 20 years, his work has focused on mediating conflict with empathy. And John also facilitates online conversations called Across the Aisle, which are designed to be group conversations to hear and understand each other across political differences. Thank you so much for being here, John, and talking to us.
My pleasure.
Let's just jump into it, and I'd love to hear from you a bit more about Across the Aisle, what those conversations are, and what motivated you to start hosting them.
Yeah, so it's over a year ago now. It was in the United States here, the ramping up to our presidential election of 2020, and things were getting very heated and polarized in our society around the election and between the two main parties here, the Democratic Party, Republican Party. And a colleague of mine, Paul Sterling, NVC colleague, he's reached out to me and said, you know, would you like to do something together around this NVC and what's happening in the political world and something we could offer? And I said, yeah, sure, I'd like to do something. Don't know what that could be, but yeah, let's. And then we just kind of brainstormed. We came up with just creating this online open forum, and that we would start facilitating dialogue across differences in the politics. And so we learned a lot over the first few weeks and then months, and then we actually, 2 more people joined us as a team. So 4 of us were holding that together. That was really lovely to work as a team to kind of try to work out what's the process to support this kind of conversation. So those 2 people, Corey Tyler and Katrina Valancourt. So the 4 of us do that. And then this process emerged. It took a little bit, but it was basically the 4 questions that parallel the 4 basic components of nonviolent communication, but they're in a question format. And there's something about just being questions that it seemed like that almost basically anybody could relate to those different layers of conversation. So the first question was just about what topic do you want to talk about? So within the political, social area, trying to asking people to pick something specific, we realized that was important to narrow something down, right? And then the second question is, what belief or meaning do you give? So that turned out to be important to sort of draw out what is the political and what is the particular viewpoint, and getting someone to kind of be clear and state that. And then the third question is, what emotions are you feeling in your body, right, to get to that layer. And then the last question is, what do you want? What do you want personally, but also universally? So those questions, those evolved over time. And those really help. So people take turns in the process, which I still do to this day. Every week I've continued it on. And so yeah, the process is different people take turns speaking, using the 4 questions to express something. And then the process is the next person that wants to talk reflects back what the previous person said until that person feels understood. And there's some other nuances that have kind of developed around that, but that's the essence of it, of the what we do in these group meetings. And it's really been wonderful of like how many different people have shown up for this, people with a lot of differences, not as maybe as there's some groups of people who haven't shown up as much as others, but there's still been lots of differences between people that show up for this, and then some come quite regularly. So it's been about like a community of folks that come and talk about what's happening politically, and just how important to be able to talk about these things in a space that's about, what I've learned is really drawing out our differences instead of avoiding them or minimizing them or right? Or obviously, fighting against, but to actually invite the differences, invite the disagreement. And then with the faith that we can hear and understand that, and then we can drop underneath that to what we all have, the shared kind of emotions and what we all want and need as human beings. And so it's just been a beautiful journey, really, of seeing these conversations happen week after week, and how deep it goes, and how moved people get, and how just the connection that happens, even when there are differences between people, there's still this connection that happens very beautifully every time. So yeah, that's a little bit of what we've done there.
What really strikes me as I hear you describe this is the idea of drawing out our disagreements, of actually creating space where we can bring those disagreements and put them on the table. Because very often I know I'm hesitant to do that, mostly because of, well, how am I going to hold the conversation if we, if we actually acknowledge the elephant in the room. And I'm also hearing that it's possible to have connection even when we're talking about our disagreements. So yeah, I'm just struck by that. It sounds a little counterintuitive as well, because it's very different from what most kinds of conversations that we're used to, I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, I through this particular project, if you will, of this conversation, this across the aisle conversation, and in relation to my other work, it's really more and more, it's so apparent to me that there are different structures of conversation, and that I like to call it an empathic structure. So there's different ways to structure that, but that there's a kind of overarching way that the structure of a conversation can be shaped sort of towards empathy. And there are the skills and the kind of where you're putting your attention, the languaging, right? But then there's just what's the process of the conversation? What's the overall form and structure of it? And with a certain kind of structure, yeah, what would seem counterintuitive and just not work, right? It works to be able to bring our differences together if there's the right structure for it. And I've actually found that maybe this is repeating slightly, but that it's important to go through our differences. In my longtime work with nonviolent communication, I think there tends to be this, let's get right past any beliefs that we might disagree on and get right to where we share our common feelings and needs. But doing this work with the political and social divides, I've found it's actually really important to engage our beliefs and stories and meanings that we each bring to these kind of issues, and create a space where people can learn the skill and really the art of how do you understand someone else when we really disagree strongly, especially. And that it's not easy, right? It's quite challenging. We're not hard, there's a lot of, millennia of evolution that kind of goes against that, but that how powerful and important it is. It's like essential, I think, to engage our differences, to engage how we see things and how we believe differently, and then from that place go through that and then get underneath that to what's common and what we all share. And that's been a deep lesson for me in doing this across the aisle process, which I didn't realize beforehand.
Yeah. And I think now, especially now, when you look at social media, when you look at the news, when you look at conversations, it's so easy. It's almost like we're being pulled to pick a side. You're either with us or you're against us. How, why is it important for us to actually be able to listen to each other in this way? in some senses, it's a lot easier to be in our own echo chambers, to surround ourselves with people who think and see things the way we do. Why would I want to sort of stretch and listen to somebody who has a diametrically opposite view to mine?
So what I found is like that you know, in the world, I imagine many of us kind of despair now because of the phenomena you're describing, the polarization, the echo chambers, the kind of tribalization, right? And in that, how basic trust in truth and in information and who we trust with information, that's been a core part of the breakdown really of society, not here in the United States big time, but I think many countries around the world, this breakdown of trust and information and truth. And it can seem very hopeless that we will ever agree again on really basic fundamental knowledge of what's a fact and what's an opinion, right? That's gotten so blurred, and all this accusation, oh, that's fake news, and right, that's misinformation, but everybody's saying that about everybody else. So what I found in doing this process is you don't need to. I mean, I knew it before with my work with mediation and conflict, that but it really came clear to me that if we start off with just acknowledging how you see a fact different than I do, and sometimes, right, when it's really basic, you know, like that, it could even be something that the earth revolves around the sun or something, like, you know, is that true or not? Yeah, but even whatever level of what seems maybe to me like an absolute clear just fact, whereas for you believe something totally different at this point, that's okay. Like this is what you're saying, right? You believe that, you know, that the sun is going around the earth, right? That's what you're saying. You believe that, and tell me why you believe that. And okay, all right. And then now let me tell you what I believe, you know? And if we can do that, and then we can get to what's under that, where we share what we all kind of want and what's important to us as human beings, right? Then we can, on the other side of that, we can then start cooperating on whatever action we need to take about the sun and the earth and whatever it is in this little made up example, but that we can still work together, we can still cooperate, even if we disagree on pretty radically different facts and truths. And obviously it's not ideal, right? The more we can agree, the more we have shared reality, the more we're going to be able to do together. But still, I just feel that if that's really just, you know, the phenomena of our society now is to have that much fundamental mistrust around that kind of information, then okay, there's still a way to get to cooperation. That's what I've found, that you don't have to have that agreement on the facts. You can still, if you go through a process like that, get to, oh, how can we work together on what we both share is most important to all of us, and then finding ways that we can still work together. So that gives me hope, because I believe the only way at this point, with the technologies, the power of the technologies we humans have, if we can't work together, we're in big trouble. Like, I think we're done in a way. Like we just can't keep going on the way we're going. And so we have to find a way together, enough of us to cope and respond well to the challenges, the global existential challenges we face. So that's what gives, I really believe that, even though we're in this place of kind of post-truth world, some call it, like where we can have more shared agreement on what's true, that we can still have conversation this way. We can still get to cooperation.
So in a sense, we're not sometimes having these conversations because we don't have the trust, and the not addressing the disagreements itself leads to lesser trust and a smaller possibility that we'll be able to get along.
Yes, exactly. I've come to the point now like everybody, like I don't like to be in a certain kinds of disagreement. It's uncomfortable. If somebody believes something that's really radically different than, like they just see a completely different world, completely different, it's uncomfortable. It can be very, very scary and angering and frustrating and painful. But now, having done this work for a while in this way, I actually almost look forward to disagree. Like, oh, let me see if I can understand that, even but I don't agree. Like it feels like a challenge that I enjoy. Even I welcome it as if I can frame it to me as this is part of getting connected across these massive divides. And it doesn't. I don't see disagreement and differences in the same way at all anymore. I kind of, well, it leads then into being able to appreciate our differences, right? So there's a cliche almost around diversity and unity and how important diversity is, right? That's a wonderful concept. But when the diversity means you believe things that are really frightening to me, or just completely I can't relate to, right? Then that diversity can be very threatening. But right, we know from whether it's from the physical sciences or philosophies or whatever, like the more there's diversity, the more richness of diverse information that can be synthesized. And that again, I think, is the hope for humanity, that we enough of the incredible diversity of humanity being able to pool our intelligence and our wisdom and our intuitions and come together with all that diversity, we have a chance to really respond well to the challenges on any level, local to global, that we need the diversity. And often there's kind of talking about that how wonderful diversity is, but it can be very scary. So this again gives a way to do what I think is, like on a genetic level, right? The more rich, diverse the gene pool, the more you're going to have this robust, strong, highly evolved way of meeting the present moment. So I think, that's what we need to do to really maximize how we can bring together our diversities.
And when we speak about diversity, I noticed one of the reasons it's hard for me to hold conversations with people who see things way differently than I do is because then if I'm truly open to being impacted by what they're saying, it means all of a sudden I have to move from this black and white space of thinking to, my view is right and yours is wrong, into holding a lot of nuance, a lot of complexity, a lot of things, some of which may contradict each other. And just noticing how uncomfortable it can be to actually move into that in-between space. How does one navigate that?
Yeah, again, the structure of the conversation, I think without a certain overt, with these kind of conversations, without an overt structure that's there, I think it's very, very hard for most people, a lot of people. But if there is somewhat of a kind of this agreement, really, that we're going to, some of the basic elements are the agreement that we can take turns, like say you can speak and I'll listen, and then I speak and you listen. That seems to be a really important part of the structure. And then I think important, maybe not necessary, but to be able to repeat back what we're hearing each other say, because there's something that really gets added when you say back what somebody else said and then you hear it said back to you what you said. Like there's something that really deepens there. And the kind of, I was going to say the trust that you're going to get to something more common, but just on for your question, just on that level of differences and people's ability to hold that complexity, I think that kind of structure and that intention. So to reassure people that you're being asked to say what you're understanding without agreeing. So you don't need to agree or disagree at all. Like when you're listening to somebody, just trying to understand and really get across that difference between understanding and agreement, which, as you're sort of indicating, for a lot of people, those get very mixed together. And then it becomes like, well, if I understand you, then that means I agree with you. So to really make clear to people that don't see that difference, that there is a difference there, And then there can be this ability, at least with over time and maybe some practice, to hold that complexity more, to say, okay, I can understand you without losing track of me. That I don't have to give up what I see, how I believe, in order to understand you. But yeah, that's like a very almost evolved way of holding our differences, and not everybody has that experience of being able to do that. But I think with the right structure, with the right guidance and facilitation, a lot of people with support, if they're willing to engage in that kind of process, can kind of stretch and expand that ability in us to do both, to kind of like, okay, I can stay connected to my reality, and I can start to hear yours. Like that we do have that ability. And I in my years of training, there's of mediation, this model of 3 chairs, the 2 chairs of disputants, and then the 3rd chair, the mediator. To me, that symbolizes this ability we're talking about, that I think we all have within us, the part of us that can hold the both sides of something. We can hold our own, we can hold other, and parts of us that can't do that. But I think there's maybe it's very hasn't been developed in some of us, but that's in us, this 3rd chair perspective, that we all can kind of sit back. We can learn to be more aware and hold a kind of the duality in a kind of non-duality of that part of us that can do that. So on that level, I just the 3 chairs to me just keeps reminding me that to have faith that people can do that, even though it is quite difficult, it is quite challenging for a lot of people, but that it's possible for most, if not all of us, if there's a willingness to go into, it's like if you're willing to step into that sacred space, that container of a certain kind of conversation, and if someone's really willing to go in there, then I think that it can find that place in all of us where we can hold self and other without choosing between them. Because that's when, once we can hold the duality, then the synthesis can happen, the creative possibilities can come together with that diversity into the unity of a new possibility. And I think so we need to find that ability in us, to not just be in our silos, but to know that it's possible to stay really true to ourselves and hear what's true for another person. So this is how I try to get that idea across.
What I'm getting is that it's about willingness, and it's also about the structure of the conversation that really guides our awareness or our sharing into a particular direction. And on that note, I heard you say a little while ago about the 4 questions that you invite sharing around. I noticed 2 things. One was that the questions themselves are about me, not you. And this is quite a departure from most kinds of conversations across differences, where often the focus is on you and how, you are wrong, for example. And the other is on getting you before I respond with my piece. And I'm noticing that these already are so different from how most conversations I've seen play out across these differences. So my question is, if someone who's watching this video would like to try practicing what this might be like in their life, what are some small steps they can take to start moving into the space of being able to hold my piece and what, your view?
Yeah. Well, I think any nonviolent communication training, so you'll get some experience with that probably in a lot of different training approaches that different people would offer. So I every week I offer a space for people to come and do this. So I think that it's about doing it and kind of practicing it. And often that's why people come over and over again, that come back to this space, and a certain community is formed of people who come more regularly. And then there's new people that continue to come, but that people, I think I've heard them say, they get inspired by what we do there on this political level of conversation to take that into their lives, this basic structure really. And but to get a taste of it, to go somewhere where you can actually do it. And I have been teaching other people how to do this process the way I've learned how to do it. So in South Korea, there's an NVC colleague of mine, Catherine Singer, who's very been in the NVC world for a long time. She and I have known each other, and she started coming to my across the aisle meetings, and then she got inspired and she asked me to train some people in South Korea so that they could use this process to have conversations, because right now they're starting into their lead up to their presidential election, and it's very heated, just like it's been here in the United States. So she's going to be using, so there are hopefully more and more opportunities, places people can go to do this kind of process, but that would be one step to either come to my across the aisle or something like that, where people are practicing this, or even just, any kind of nonviolent communication training that's about learning how to empathize with others. But often we need to, for people that are not so familiar with that approach, that often the need to empathize with ourselves, to get the empathy for ourselves first, and get reassured that we're very anchored in our own experience, and then can we learn how to empathize with other people, which is not about agreement. So the NVC training in general is very good for that. But this, doing it in a political, the difficulty of political conversation and how triggering and how polarizing, right? So that it's to be able to do it there is very important. Let me also say one other thing that I've been doing too, that's another weekly event that goes kind of hand in hand with this, like it's very supportive of it. I call it reconciliation and healing conversations. So the people that come to that, the focus tends to be more on personal conflicts and conversations to be had with people, but it's really learning other kinds of structures that are like empathic for conversation, but more like on a one-to-one level, and differences back and forth, or like when there's emotional hurt or pain. So a reconciliation, so a healing process of conversation. And I've found that people, when they're also learning about how to address those kind of emotional hurt and pain issues that come up in conflicts and personal conflicts, then that can help as well be informed when we're having the more political things that sometimes trigger those deeper hurts and pains and wounds that we carry. The traumas that we carry can get triggered by the political differences, right? And the strength of anger or whatever it might be. So I think that's another important way to take some steps of practicing and doing trauma work, just getting more familiar with the places that we hold those deeper hurts, and to know how to be aware of when that's activated and triggered in us, and to be able to connect to ourselves in a way that we can stay present in a more difficult conversation. So my goal now is to keep offering these across the aisle conversations, to teach other people, but also to work with organizations and networks, just to facilitate this structure of conversation around differences in a group, but also that brings in this ability to deal with like the deeper hurt and pain that can come up as well. So those are the things I'm doing that people can plug into, and you'll probably let people know if they want to connect with my particular work. And these two events you can find on my website, johnkinyon.com/events, so my events page on my website. But yeah, there's a lot of people in nonviolent communication doing wonderful work. And I think you're interviewing a bunch of those people, especially as it relates to social change. And so I'm hoping from all the good work you're doing and the people that you know, how you're letting folks know about who's doing what in the world related to this. I think you're offering a great resource as well for how to do what we're talking about. But yeah, that's how people can check out more what I'm doing and get some support to do this. Because yeah, that's really the way, is to do it, to kind of dive in and do it, and then you start experiencing it, and then you can apply it in your own life.
And we could probably put the link to your website on the description of this video so people can find you and get in touch with you about these. I have one last question, and this came up because I heard you talk about intensity and, you know, how it's almost like the intensity gets cranked up and deeper feelings or worries or fears surface when we have certain kinds of conversations. And that is, a lot of the time we may not be having these conversations because there's a fear of, what if it fails? What if I fall flat on my face once I initiate a conversation like this with someone I know? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, yeah, one reason it's so hard to have difficult conversations is, as you say, we get triggered, we get those intensity reactions come up in us or in the other person or both. And right, so easily the conversation goes off track and it starts turning into accusations and blame and defensiveness. And it just gets very, very painful, really. And especially with the people close to us. And so maybe I'll just add a little bit to something I've been saying about this idea of a structure of conversation, to be able to ask somebody else. So if like you and I are having a difference around something, a conflict that's come up, if I just try to go and talk to you, that's hard. And even with all the skills I have, I can still sometimes lose my ability to use my skills because I'm triggered into that fight, flight, freeze response, that stress response in the brain. But if I say to you, Ranjitha, like, I'd like to talk to you about this thing, and I want to have a good conversation. I'm kind of worried about it, that I want to talk well with each other. And is it okay if we use a bit of a process where we slow down, we really try to make sure we're listening to each other and we're understanding, and then what's important to us, and it just like bring a bit of structure to how we're talking about this, kind of different than normal. Is that okay with you? Can we try that, to just so we can maybe have a good conversation about this, and it would really help me feel like it could have confidence we can do this together. So something like that. And then often if I say that to you, right, you most of the time maybe you'd say, okay, well, we could try it, or yeah, right. And then once we're holding it together, once we both, even if I know it better than you do, and I'm more, kind of holding that inner facilitator role in a way, but because I've asked you overtly and you've given some kind of, even if you say no, right, I've still at least put it out there, and it's kind of sitting there as a kind of idea between us. It helps me feel held. It's like I talked about the 3 chairs of a structure. I can almost feel myself be held in, there's this me and you and this sort of 3rd chair perspective that's holding us in this structure. And I can kind of relax into just doing what I know how to do, in taking turns listening to each other, really trying to hear across differences. And so I believe that if we can ask the other person to step into that space with us, it's much more likely we can do it. And whatever skill level we have, that there's some sense where we're holding the process together in a certain way. And then I found then I can use the skills I have. They don't tend to leave me the way that they some do without being held. It's almost like if you go to a mediator and you have that person sitting there holding the two of you, right? It's almost like that. If you can get some agreement with the other person to use a certain kind of form of the conversation, then I find that we can, even when things get intense, and we can kind of be held in that process and still do it in a way that keeps us connected. So that's been a big learning for me too, over the more recent times, of how important inviting that other person into this certain space of conversation. I think of a three-dimensional space, so that there's me, you, and there's this other dimension that's about holding both of us together. And if we have that shared between us, this kind of sense that that's what we're doing, then I think it's what might feel pretty impossible, like too difficult, too intense, too overwhelming, can actually be possible. It's, it can take other things too. There's a lot of training of how to deal with intensity, but wherever we are, if we're held that way, I think it's much more possible.
I'm guessing it also adds to the general amount of trust that the two of us have. If I were to ask for your consent to invite you into this, rather than spring it on you all of a sudden. Yeah. So it's an invitation, a request, not a demand. Would you kind of do this with me and hold this with, be in this space together with me? And something else in what you just said. Can't remember, but yeah, that it can be offered as a I can't. It was another distinction besides a request that isn't a demand. But there's something about giving someone a kind of like asking permission. That's come up for me a lot. That, like in nonviolent communication, we often just reflexively start repeating back what people say. That's often part of the training, the learning, but then people bring it into their relationships and conversations, just start repeating back what people are saying. And some people don't really like that very much. They're not familiar with it. They don't really trust it. What's going on? Why are you saying back to me what I just said that? But if we ask permission, we say, would it be okay with you if I said back what I heard? Would you like me to say back what I heard? Or we've created this agreement that we're going to do this certain conversation that can be built into it. It suddenly makes it permissible, and people don't react to those kind of things in the same way, because it's kind of, we're in this certain space, or I'm asking you in a respectful way to get your permission to do these things. And that often opens up this again, kind of making possible what might normally seem not possible. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for speaking to us, John. As we close, is there anything that you'd like to say to bring this to completion?
I just want to say how much I'm appreciating what I understand that Living Bridges is doing, bridging people that are doing the nonviolent communication work with all the other social change work happening out there, and bringing that together. And I want to appreciate you all for the work you're doing, and how it gives me hope. Like sometimes I despair a bit at what I see happening in the world and how bad it is in some ways, but then I see all this good stuff happening that's so hopeful and so inspiring, and so you give me a chance to share what I'm doing, but you're the one that's creating the kind of the platform for other people to learn about it, and people to get connected across these different modalities and ways that we're all trying to help and contribute to humanity. I think kind of making an evolutionary leap so that we can respond to what we need to respond to. So I just thank you for the good work you're doing. And it was really a pleasure to talk with you. I appreciate your questions and just the flow, the pacing of our conversation. So it's really, really great talking to you.
Thank you. And I think I'm taking away a lot from this conversation that I'm going to chew on in the coming days. Thank you for being with us. So for all of you who are watching, this was a Living Bridges conversation. a series of conversations that we're holding about bridging different worlds and about the value of empathy and compassion and nonviolent principles in social change work. This conversation is a part of our fundraiser. You can find more information about our fundraiser it'll come up soon in the video, and you can also see it in the description. Thank you for being with us today.